Now let's meet our studio guest who says he has been dancing for most of his life, and over 10 years ago he created the Represent Dance Company. He's now on a mission to bring breakdancing, if I can call it that, we'll find out what the official term should be in a moment, but he wants to bring breakdancing into the island's primary schools, and he's also a maths tutor and a magician as well. David Cowley, welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much.
You're wearing a very fetching hat there. Is that part of the outfit that you have to wear? Do you have to wear a hat to breakdance?
It's mostly to cover the bald patch, but
but there seems to be a sort of there's a very definite type of clothing that break dancers wear.
Well, yeah. If you look back at like the original kind of footage and all the rest of it, there's a lot of tracksuits. There's a lot of very distinctive looks. Nowadays, you find people are a lot more relaxed about what they wear. Some people approve of this and some people disapprove of this. But if you go and look at a competition, then you'll find just about anything you could imagine, usually.
I said about the whole language with regard to breakdancing, because most people know what breakdancing is when you say it like that. Is that the right thing to call it?
Not really, no. I don't make a huge deal out of it because everyone knows it as breakdancing. So if you want to make someone understand what it is that you do, that's the easiest way to do so. The people who got the whole thing started off regard the term quite negatively, because when it got out of their control and when it became overly commercialized, that's the term that got stuck on it. They would always refer to it as b-boying or b-girling or breaking, and it just became this other thing. So they regard that with a little bit of a negative aspect.
Okay, well, take us back then. Where did it all start?
Well, it started in the 70s. It started in the Bronx, in obviously America, and essentially there was a whole melting pot of things that were going on at that time, but it was all set against a background of people who had incredible challenges facing them socially, personally, a very negative culture they were stuck in. And a combination of music and dance and movement and sort of taking back your identity was all part of this thing, and they just fell into this thing and created this thing as young kids, which captured the imagination of all the people around them, and it just grew and grew and grew from there, and it's now this worldwide phenomenon, and it has evolved and mutated an awful lot over the years. But it started off with this kind of driving force of doing something positive and challenging yourself and making something of yourself and for yourself.
And so you mentioned as well at the start there the terms b-boy and b-girl. Was it always something that was available for both genders then? It wasn't specific in that respect?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a sense of it as being a very guy thing, and certainly if you look at it, it's quite male dominated. I think it's far more obvious to a boy to look at something like that perhaps and say, oh, that's something I'd like to do. But ever since the beginning, there's been women and girls involved in it as well. And some of my favourite dancers are actually women. They have such style and such funk. It's less about doing a spectacular acrobatic move and more about like a feeling of the music. And I think that's always something which has really appealed to me as a dancer.
As I say, you say you've been dancing for most of your life. When did you find this particular form?
My first real exposure to this was when I was 18. It was my first year of university. I went along to the club at the university. I went to that for around about 6 to 8 months, and then I just stopped going. There's such a lot going on in those years that one thing takes over, another thing takes over, exam revision comes around. And I'm very, very regretful that I didn't keep up with it at that point, because I found out much later on that the guy teaching that class was a very, very well-known and very well-respected dancer on the UK scene, and I could have learned an awful lot from him. I came back to the Isle of Man after my degree, and I started teaching dance again. I got involved in a small steps, and then eventually found out that I needed to educate myself about this culture if I wanted to teach the dance. And so I started looking abroad to people who could help me with that. And I'll bring them here, I would go and travel and see them. So around about the age of 28, I really got quite serious about learning this thing, and I haven't looked back since.
And you actually met some of the really sort of key early players in the scene, didn't you?
Yeah, one guy in particular, he was there right at the very beginning, right in the thick of everything. He goes by the name Marine Boy, and and we actually didn't do any breaking in that workshop. He was teaching us the lesson hustle, which is one of the party dances and things that was around at that point that he was involved in. But just listening to his tales of what life was like, living there, really gives you a very real sense of the circumstances they were dealing with and where this thing came out of, you know. So it was really very interesting and very inspiring.
Now, I've seen some of the YouTube clips of some of the things you do, and to be honest, Dave, I'd be worried about hurting myself.
Well, it's it all looks quite dramatic, and certainly if you're looking at it from nowhere, you know, you can say, how are these people not killing themselves every time they do this thing? But our injury rate is actually very, very low. There is a natural progression to all the movement. And one of the interesting things about this dance is because it came about so organically. Let's try doing this and let's try doing that. You know, there's a story about the guy who created the backspin. I think everyone either knows or can imagine what a backspin is. And they used to do the thing in a very rough and ready way. They would spin around on their bums and then roll onto their backs, and then maybe spin 2 or 3 times. And the guy who kind of started the journey to perfecting this movement, he was practicing in a narrow corridor in the apartment block where he lived. And he was trying to balance on one hand, and as he swung into that position, he fell, and he landed on his back. And because he was nervous about hitting the walls, he tucked his legs in, and discovered almost by accident at that point that made him go faster. You know, in the same kind of picture you have of an ice skater starting off with their arms out wide and then bringing everything in order to increase their speed. So he kind of stumbled on that at that point, and then immediately his friend said, "Wow, do that again." So this is a very kind of typical story of where this dance comes from. Everything is built upon an easier, simpler movement that came before. So it actually, in many ways, respects the body and how it wants to move, because anything too unnatural in the beginning doesn't exist. It can't exist. And later on, sure, you find some very unnatural movements and some very crazy movements. But if you're there, it's because you've trained your body in very kind of sensible steps to be there. So it does look dangerous, perhaps, when you see it done at a high level, but you have to realize the journey that takes you there is actually very organic, and anyone can start to learn, and you can engage with the dance on whatever level that you want to. There are people who keep it very upright and just really work with the music, and their dancing is absolutely fantastic, but it's still part of that whole thing. It's a very flexible, very individual dance, so you don't have to kill yourself doing it.
I think it's probably more dangerous to be in the crowd, to be honest, because there's legs and arms flailing everywhere, isn't it? It's fantastic. And I was going to ask actually another move. You've got something called Windmill Fridays, haven't you? Explain what a windmill is and why Windmill Fridays.
Okay, so a windmill it goes by several names. The original name was a continuous backspin. What you do for that one is you roll onto your back and you turn on your back for around about half a turn, and then flip your body over so you're now facing the floor again, so you can repeat. So you are sort of constantly cycling from your front to your back, from your front to your back, with your legs windmilling around off the ground behind you. The reason why I instigated Windmill Fridays is because I'm terrible at them. And I have always been terrible at them because, as I said before, it's a very individual dance, and my interest and my instinct has always led me into other aspects of the moves that are available to you. But I finally decided enough is enough, I need to get this thing. So I said, I'm going to set it up for the dance school every Friday. I'm going to train this thing, and the people who want to learn it can come and train it with me. And so we are getting there. We're getting there together. And it's been an interesting learning journey, but I'm finally getting to the point where I've got it and I can see the kids are getting it. So that's one of the movements which looks very dynamic and very impressive. It's the sort of movement which you cannot mistake for anything else apart from breakdancing. And you don't want to be too close to it when it starts to go off.
Would it be one that you could maybe attach some cloths to yourself and do the floor at the same time?
One of the most spectacular things I've seen in that vein is someone who, and I'm not suggesting that anyone try this at home at all ever, strapped fireworks to their feet.
Oh my word.
And did movement like that, spinning on their heads, doing windmills, all these sorts of very gymnastic movements, and they got themselves in a big open space at night and lit off these sort of very dramatic kind of sparkler type fireworks and just went for it. Kind of like the guys who do the sort of fire juggling and they spin around all this pyrotechnic stuff just but on their feet. Ludicrously stupid idea, but really, really spectacular to watch. And if you type it into YouTube, you'll find it really easily.
Do not try that, Beth.
Gosh, I'll just strike that off the list.
Do. I'm intrigued because, you talked a lot about how it's very much rooted in an entire culture and where it sort of came from. How is it translated on the Isle of Man? Because we are very different to all of that.
I think you have to get out of something like this, something that's personal to you. So obviously the situation that this culture was born in doesn't really apply on the Isle of Man, I think, to anyone, certainly not to me. But I did a workshop for a contemporary dance school a few weeks ago, and we were talking about the intention of different styles of dance. And one of the things that I said to them was, what I asked them, obviously, because I'm not a contemporary dancer, was I didn't believe that contemporary dance had a fixed intention, a fixed thing that it was trying to say. It was very flexible. And they and their teacher agreed. Whereas an awful lot of the styles of dance that are either hip-hop or associated with the culture, the funk styles and things like this, tend to have, at least in the beginning, a very, very fixed intention. So breakdancing is very much about your own strength and your own character. It's very individual. Originality is a huge part of the thing. So when you do that, you're very much doing it in a sense of, look at me, look at what I can do, now what have you got? And there's a certain sense of challenging yourself and challenging the world around you. And to me, I can relate to that. I had a lot of trouble getting on with other kids in school. I was a massive maths geek, so I very typically found it difficult to make friends. I was also a country and western line dancer at the age of sort of 13, 14, and I really committed to that, and that didn't really help my social situation. So I had I felt an awful lot of when I started to get into it, I felt that's what I was tapping into. I was trying to overcome that kid who didn't know how to get on with those around him, and was just constantly having difficulty. And so I'm overcoming that every time I dance. So for me, like, that aspect of the culture is what I would go for, and what I would tap into. So it's not the same journey and it's not the same intensity, nor would I want it to be. But for me, that's what's there. There's an element of challenging yourself and overcoming something within our dance. And every one of the dances associated with what we do has a similar sort of one-dimensional intention that it started with. And if you can relate to that, then I think you're allowed to do it, The other dance that I really enjoy is called locking. And locking was invented essentially by a guy who couldn't dance and didn't care. And everyone would make fun of him because he couldn't dance and he was okay looking daft. And I think anyone who's ever been to a works party will know someone who can't dance and doesn't care. And whilst everyone's okay having a bit of a laugh at them, I think we're also secretly quite jealous of them because they're just out there and they're going for it and having a great time. And the guy who invented locking, that was him, but to the ultimate degree. And he eventually stumbled on something good, and everyone wanted to join in. And actually, this guy, his name was Don Campbell, and he formed a group called the Lockers, or the Campbell Lockers, and they were the first commercially massive dance crew out there on TV ever. So anyone who sort of came up through Britain's Got Talent, for instance, who everyone's very aware of nowadays, these guys were the originals. I mean, they had cartoon series about them and all the rest of it. It's a huge, huge thing. So his dance is all about having fun and being silly and comical. A lot of the moves are named after cartoon characters, and it's just silly and fun, but also physically dynamic and impressive. So if you have an aspect to you that likes to have fun and likes to be a bit daft, then that dance is for you. So there's something for everyone in there. You just have to figure out what it is you're tapping into and go for it.
Which is a brilliant thing then to take into primary schools, which is your ultimate aim, because I mean, all these children, they're on different journeys, aren't they? And some of them will be experiencing similar issues to you perhaps when you were younger and maybe sort of struggled to fit in. So giving them that, I don't know, just that sense of empowerment almost would be brilliant.
Well, I think it's a fantastic thing because it's physically very dynamic and very active. I was never a kid who was particularly interested in sports or PE, so having something like this when I was that age would have been an opportunity to actually get some of that physical fitness and some of that movement, which I now know is so important. You form a very, very supportive community with the people around you. You know, the whole context of our dance is dancing with each other. And it's one of the things which I really love about what we do, because every week we dance with each other. That is the whole point of learning, is so that you can dance with each other, whether you're challenging each other or whether you're just sharing what you've got with each other. Every week we dance. We're not aiming towards a show every 2 years or a competition at the end of the month or anything like that. Those aspects are there, but that's not the point. And so you are having this incredibly positive interaction, and you're expressing yourself to the people around you without having to use your words. And that, again, for kids is incredibly beneficial. So they're being active, they're being physical, they're forming a real team bond with the kids around them, a real supportive bond with the kids around them. And it's fun. It's
really
fun to throw
sounds
yourself
like
around.
it.
My
Really
6-year-old
does.
and my 2-year-old, the moment they see it, they immediately want to join in, and they just throw themselves at it. I've never met a small child who didn't want to. I take my kids out to play, and sometimes they'll want to dance, and if you stick at it for more than a few minutes, other kids are joining in. And it's this really kind of magnetic thing.
A brilliant image. Isn't that great?
Well, David, lovely to have you with us. Do stay with us. We're talking to David Moore in just a moment, but now it's 2.
Women Today.
This is Women's Day on Manx Radio. It is 21 minutes to 3. I've been talking to Dave Cowley this afternoon, who really wants to get youngsters in the Isle of Man involved in, I'm going to have to say breakdancing, because most people,
That's fine,
I mean, I know the real terminology, but, I won't use it. How is that going to work, Dave? Because currently you've got quite a few things going on, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, I mean, life is tremendously busy with 3 jobs and 2 small children. But I'm dropping the day job. I'm leaving that after 8 years at the end of this term, and that's going to give me some time to devote to my projects and my passions. One of which is obviously trying to get dance out into the primary schools and actively go looking for funding and someone who's willing to support the project, so that we can do it on the scale and in the way we want to, because it's all about providing opportunities and something really special, either to start them on a journey as a dancer or to just give them something incredibly memorable to look back on from their school years, So the idea is to create the time and then really be able to fully invest in it, and that's what I'm doing.
Is there an upper age limit when somebody really shouldn't maybe consider starting this form of dancing?
No. And I say that because 2 of my very good friends are teachers in Leeds. They've come over to the Isle of Man, I think, 3 or 4 times now to teach and to compete. And they're fantastically inspirational people. And the grandmother dances with them, and she is in her 90s.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
I mean, she's not spinning on her head.
I was going to say.
Yeah, she's not spinning on her head. But she trains regularly and she dances with them, and she's really funky. So there is no upper age limit. It all comes down to what you want to do with your time.
Okay, if there was one song that for you sort of encapsulated this whole thing and really always makes you want to just get up and move, what is it?
It's a track called Funky President by James Brown, and I believe that you might have it.
Okay, let's hear a little bit.
Funky down.
Actually does make you want to move, doesn't it?
Yeah, we were both moving.
We were. Now, you just asked Dave an interesting question about crumping. Now, I thought that was something you did to your hair.
I got the word wrong, though, I have to say. I said crunking.
Oh, right, okay.
It's crumping, yeah.
I did think it was the sort of thing you did to your hair, but that's crimping. What is crumping?
Crumping is... hip-hop dance is always evolving, and the dances associated with it always evolving as well. Crumping, I guess, is one of the more recent evolutions. It's a very, very specific form of self-expression. As far as I know, I don't do it. I've not ever trained in it. But what I know about it is it's all about expressing yourself and trying to get an awful lot of any kind of negative energy you have out through the form of dance. When I look at it, it looks very much like physical therapy, almost. Like you're trying to just rid yourself of anything that is bringing you down. So it can look really aggressive and it can look really intense. But then afterwards, the people who are doing it look tremendously happy because they've just managed to get it all out of their systems. So I think it's a really interesting form of dance, but I don't know much about it, and I certainly couldn't give you a demonstration.
But do you know what I'm thinking, CD?
What, we're going to have a crump off?
No, I wasn't thinking that. No, I was just thinking generally, maybe this needs to be one of our 50 Things challenges, maybe giving the older break dancing a bit of a go.
Do you know what? I would be up for it. It would give everyone a giggle.
Yeah, we wouldn't. Oh, would we have to video it? Would we?
I think
Well,
so,
of
yes,
course.
absolutely.
Oh.
Yeah,
Okay.
don't worry, I'll film it while you're learning. I think we
Okay,
should.
David, would you be up for that? I mean, can you just come along if you've got no real dance experience at all, apart from,
Absolutely.
throwing down some funky shapes at the work pathers party? When you said that, I was thinking of me.
I want to bring this back a little bit to what you were saying before, actually, because you mentioned the fact that in order to do these classes in the schools, that you're giving up the day job. We haven't really touched on what you do as a day job. Let's inform our listeners.
Well, the one job is obviously the dance teacher, and then before any of that, I was a maths tutor, and I've done that consistently throughout my whole life. And then for the last 8 years, I've also been teaching maths part-time at King William's College, and that's the day job that I'm leaving this year.
He's got to be the coolest maths teacher you could possibly have. How do the kids react to you?
Once they find out that I do dance, then you have a couple of very interesting lessons where you're trying to get them to focus on the fact that you're there to teach them maths. I have on occasion dance battled my students, and that's always been a lot of fun, but always in a very professional sense, of course. But the two things inform each other an awful lot. For me, the two disciplines are really connected, especially when it comes to teaching.
How?
Well, being a maths teacher, you learn that you are somewhat of a social leper. As soon as you tell people that you teach maths, you tend to get a very common reaction, which is people create distance from you, and they immediately tell you how much they can't do maths, or hated maths in school, or whatever their massively negative experience was. And everyone's really keen to share this. And it's really interesting for me as someone who actually likes the subject, because I've looked into this, and there is actually a dictionary-defined term called maths anxiety, and it's something which you can suffer from, because a lot of people's experience with maths is the same. It carries similar experiences as to being in an abusive relationship, where you're trying desperately hard to do something right, but you can't, and you keep on being told that you're not good enough. So a lot of people walk away with a really negative sense of the subject, and one of the things that I really want to do as a teacher is ensure that my students walk away without that experience of the subject. And it all comes down to understanding how it works. So when I first started to learn how to dance properly, I realized that it wasn't about learning a move. We talked about things like the windmill before, which is a move, and anyone can learn it with enough practice and enough dedication. You can learn that move. But you don't know how to move. All you've done is learn how to move your body around in a certain way. If you learn how to move and how to connect movements together, then the dance becomes natural after a while, in the same way that we regard walking and running as very natural movements we don't think about, because we learn when we're very young how to walk and how to run and how to jump around and climb and all the rest of it, and we do it without thinking, because we've learned how to move in that way, in that plane. To learn to breakdance, you have to learn essentially to replace your feet with your hands. So your feet can move around and your hands can support you. And that takes an awful lot of getting used to, but when you know how to move and how to transfer your weight from one place to another, it becomes more natural and more free. And when I started to learn about this concept from the people who were trying to teach it to me, I realized that as a maths teacher, there was an incredibly important lesson there, which is that people don't know how to move mathematically. They know how to solve an equation because their teacher told them. They know that a positive times a negative is a negative because their teacher told them. So they learn all of these, for want of a better term, maths moves, but they're not connected by anything that makes sense. They're not connected by anything that feels natural to them. So I've spent the last 15 years as a maths teacher trying to pin that down and deliver it to my students. And that's a really fascinating journey, but it came from the dancing. And because I find the dancing to be challenging, I'm not naturally talented at it at all. It's been a very difficult journey learning what I've learned. I always feel a great deal of empathy for my maths students who also are struggling to learn this other thing that I find easier. So I am always able to relate to their difficulties, and I'm able to relate it to my journey as a dancer. So for me, they're hugely connected, quite apart from patterns and timings and the sort of formulas of the whole thing.
Oh, I just really want to imagine you at the front of the class there. I'm just going to break it down for you. I won't say that. Did I
You
just
did
say
not
it?
listen to anything he said then, did you?
No,
You
I
were
did.
just
No.
waiting to drop that.
I wasn't. No, it
weren't
just
you?
came to me. But it's brilliant though, that idea of, because as somebody I think who possibly suffered from maths anxiety when I was younger, you're so right. There was no sort of sense of getting that point because I worked out myself. It's because you're told that works and that's why you do it. But yeah, I like that. I like that idea. I think I would have liked you to be my maths teacher.
It's very interesting for me because I don't know about you guys at school, but when I was at school, I did GCSE maths. We did maths coursework. We had to do a project as part of our assessment, and I tell the kids nowadays that I did maths coursework, and they look at me in disbelief. How can you do coursework in maths? And I was never interested in maths before that point. I was okay at it, but I got that piece of coursework and I got ill, and I spent weeks in bed and eventually ran out of books to read and programs to watch on TV, so I picked this thing up and I became fascinated, and that's where my journey in maths began. But it was figuring out how things were put together and why they were put together that way, and that, I think, is what we're missing. I think there's a lot of effort to try and deliver that. It's really, really difficult to deliver that, and it's one of the reasons why I love private tuition so much, is because that's far easier to deliver in a dialogue with somebody rather than addressing a class. But it's absolutely this, for me, it's the missing ingredient, as you say.
Now, working things out brings us on to your other passion, which is magic.
Yeah.
And again, you came to this at a very young age. You were the young magician of Man.
I was in the Young Magicians of Man, which was a magic club which ran for many, many years on the Isle of Man, run by Mike Clegg. And I joined that when I was 7 years old.
He's our guest tomorrow.
Oh, is he really?
Show. Yeah.
Okay.
Nice tie in there.
Yeah, don't ask him about me. I was somewhat difficult as a 7-year-old. Mike was wonderful, and he's continued such good work with young people on the island. And as I said before, that I struggled in school somewhat, and the Young Magicians of Man was one of the first social groups where I really felt like I belonged, and I had I had somewhere that I could be and be safe. And I was really, really deeply into it, and I did all of the shows and things that they did, and then dropped it for many years. And then when my father-in-law, before he was my father-in-law, pulled out a magic trick at a poker night, I became interested again, and as my wife would tell you, absolutely obsessed for the next 5 years with card tricks, and to the stage where I was actually performing professionally. And then I've moved on from there and become more involved in the maths and dance world, but I still pick the cards up from time to time.
I should say you have brought a pack of cards with you today, and I think what maybe we need to do after the show, Christy, is a quick video of a card trick. Would that be possible?
Sure.
Definitely. Yeah. It's not going to give any of your secrets away if we video it.
It depends how well I do it, I guess, but I'll do my I'll do my best.
Well, Dave, it's been so lovely talking to you this afternoon, and really excited about the prospect of you going into the island's primary schools. You say you are looking for somebody to support you in the funding of that. So if there's anybody listening, it would be great to get in touch, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea is that the project is called Break Free for several reasons, but one of those is that I want it to be free. I want it to be easy for people to say yes to. I want the kids to be able to say yes to it and their parents to be able to say yes to it because it's not going to cost them anything. I want the schools to be able to say yes to it because it's not going to cost them anything. And if we achieve all of that, that's the dream. And I will keep on working towards it until we've got there or as close to that as we can get to. Because if it's easy to say yes to, then that gives it its start, and that gets people to experience and delve into what it has to offer. And then we'll see how it evolves in the coming years. The idea is for it to grow and become something that's eventually by the kids, for the kids, and then I can step back from it.
And if anybody's listening, they want to know more about what you do, and we mentioned your dance school as well, how can they find you?
Well, we're on Facebook. It's Represent Dance Company on Facebook. If you search for us on there, we come up pretty quickly. Or they can just get in touch with me directly. You know, if you search David Cowley, you're going to get my contact details through the Facebook page or phone number on the website, anything like that.